Internal rate of return. So what is IRR? What is this mystery about IRR? And a lot of people don't understand what this IRR is. It's a rate of return at which project NPV is equal to zero, and that's what I tried to show you there. That over there, that if I put in the same amount of money over there, it'll be very close to zero, or it'll be zero. So it's the maximum interest rate that can be charged to a fully funded project before the project will start showing a loss. So if I was to put in 70.1% or something like that over there, now these are it's 70.1, and because all these figures are rounded and everything, it doesn't come out to exact zero, but it comes to very close to it if I put in the same amount of money in my hurdle rate. So this is what, according to this, it means is that this is where the project NPV will be equal to zero, and maximum interest rate that can be charged to a fully funded project before a project will start showing a net loss. So if this project was to be fully funded, that means 100% was debt, and we charge the project 17.1%, this project would show a net loss. So internal rate of return for investment is the percentage rate earned on each dollar invested for each period it is invested for. So what this is telling me is that if our projects, this is the international version again, was making 27.3%, that means that that's the return that I'm getting on each dollar for every period that it was invested for. And IRR is also another term people use for interest. Ultimately, IRR gives an investor the means to compare alternative investments based on their yield. So internal rate of return has two things. There's equity IRR, and then there is project IRR. So equity IRR, for example, calculation of the internal rate of return considering the cash flows net of financing gives us the equity IRR. And it means the project is funded by a mix of debt and equity. So basically, debt, whatever you borrow, and equity, which is your developer's equity. And if the project is fully funded by equity, the project IRR and equity IRR will be exactly the same. That means if you were to do the project with the exact same amount of money and everything, this is going to be your project internal rate of return, and your return on your equity is going to be exactly the same. And I'll give you an example why. If you were, now this is something that nobody tells you, and I want you to understand and get your head around this thing. If you were to fund this entire project with your own money, your development margin on cost will be exactly the same as your return on equity. And what this is telling you is very similar, that your project IRR, which is for your entire project, and your return on equity would be exactly the same. Because you have fully funded, you have put in all your money into the project. So the project only makes X amount of money on the cost, and all those figures will start matching. So in order to make a greater return on equity or a greater equity IRR, you have to leverage. That means you have to bring in the debt so that you're using less of your own money and more of the bank's money, and in order to maximize the return that you can get on your equity. If the project is fully funded by debt, then the equity IRR simply will not exist because there is no equity in there. So equity IRR assumes that you use debt for the project. So the inflows are the cash flows required minus any debt that was raised for the project. And the outflows are cash flows from the project minus any interest and debt repayments. Hence, equity IRR is simply the leverage version of project IRR. So let's go back into our feasibility and see how that comes together. So what this is doing here, it's got complex waterfall applications where it's actually calculating all the money that's required and all the money that's going out every month. How is it getting funded? Is it getting funded by the developer, or is it getting funded by debt? And what is the interest that being accumulated over that period of time? And it goes and checks to see that whether or not that interest is being paid out and everything. So in here, it keeps going up until, and it's actually paying out everything that we owe in terms of expenses and everything. And when this money comes in, this money should be more than enough to actually compensate for all the costs that we've incurred so far, all the debt interest that we've accumulated so far, so that all those outflows can actually be paid out by the inflows of the net inflows that we've got left over there. So that is what this is what this is trying to do. On the other hand, a project IRR takes into account inflows, the full amount of money that are needed in the project, and the outflows are the cash generated by the project, and the IRR is the internal rate of these cash flows. And the calculation assumes that no debt is used for the project. So, can equity IRR be less than project IRR? Yes, the equity IRR will be lower than the project IRR whenever the cost of debt exceeds the project IRR. If cost of debt is less than project IRR, equity holders make more money than debt holders. So this is one of the most important things that you got to understand. If the cost of debt is less than project IRR, that means you are making more money. You as a developer is making more money than the debt holder. And if the cost of debt is greater than your project IRR, that means equity holders lose more money than debt holders. So if you ever wanted to compare that, if you're paying more interest, or if you're paying more, or if you're making more money, this is simply that if your interest that you are paying on your debt is actually more than your internal rate of return, that means your debt holder will be making more money. That means the bank's happy because it's making more money, but they won't lend it to you because it won't cover their. Then we will learn that in different other decision metrics. So what's a levered and unlevered cash flow? Levered cash flow is the amount of cash a project has after it has met its financial obligations. So if I paid all my debt, all the interest expenses and everything has been paid out, that's my levered cash flow. That means that money is going to come back into my pocket because it's paid all its obligations. And unlevered cash flow is the money that the project has before paying its financial obligations.